Hey, how's everybody doing? Hope you're having a fantastic day. So, in this second episode of which chapter? Which chapter is it? Chapter 8. Chapter 8. Last time we talked about, okay, what is this sort of pantheistic evolutionism? What goes on? And then finally we showed how it has its crown in Hegel. Hegel's the top dog of the pantheistic evolutionists. Um, But when it comes to this episode, we're gonna see, okay, well, what's actually wrong with it? You know, what's wrong with positing these ideas? We're gonna see is that this goes against the first principles of reason. So this is going to give us a good opportunity for something didactic, because this is going to help us show the foundations, really, of the first principle, foundations of reason, how we prove the foundations of reason, how all of the foundations of reason are subordinated. And this is going to be a very cursory study. If you want something more in detail, if you look at Father Garrigou-Lagrange's God, His Existence in Nature, Volume 1, there's a very long section that talks about the first principles of reason. So you can check that out. Or if you look at St. Thomas's Commentary on the Metaphysics, Book 4, lectures 15 through 17 cover this topic. So any of those two locations, you'll be able to find out about all of these first principles of reason, how they're all subordinated, and so on and so forth. And then what's going to be fun is the next chapter, chapter 9, when we talk about agnosticism. We're going to see that agnosticism is going to not going to deny the first principles of reason, but it's going to deny the transcendental validity of these first principles of reason. So we're going to be able to continue on this exposition and critique in the next. These two chapters are really going to provide a great foundation for moving forward in this study on divine revelation. So what is the first principle of reason? So we have the first principles of reason, which are basically certain fundamental axioms. They're the fundamental axioms of the science of metaphysics. So we have all of these philosophical sciences. We have logic, we have physics, we have mathematics, and we have metaphysics, and we also have ethics in the practical realm. So we have these foundational sciences, and each one of them have first principles. That is, they have fundamental axioms from which we draw forth all of our conclusions. Now, when it comes to metaphysics, metaphysics in the natural realm at least, is the highest natural science. So what you have is you have physics. Its principles are given to it and defended from higher sciences, mathematics as well. But the highest science, metaphysics, it can't receive from any higher science in the natural order, because there's no higher science in the natural order. And therefore, extensively, just like we talked about how natural theology has fundamental theology, which defends its own principles, so also metaphysics has these first principles that get defended in something called epistemology, which this is not a systematic course on epistemology or defensive metaphysics. But if you read Grenier or Woodbury, they have good treatments of this matter. So when it comes to these first principles of reason, I'm going to share my screen real quick. And these actually, interestingly enough, fit in with the four causes. But for our principles of reason, we have the principle of contradiction, the principle of identity, the principle of substance, the principle of raison d'etre. It's pronounced weird in French. I'm just going to say d'etre. So if you can cry about it, raison d'etre. And then we have the principle of efficient causality and finality, and then the principle of change. So these are the first principles when it comes to metaphysics. And these are the first principles that we need to defend, and then we need to show how pantheistic evolutionism is going to deny these first principles. So what's the first principle? So the first principle is up here, the principle of contradiction. So the principle of contradiction is immediately founded on the first notion of reason. So in this first notion of reason is the opposition of being to non-being. So logically, so that is as a principle of thought, we say that the absurd can't be thought of. So it's impossible to affirm and deny one of the same thing from the same perspective. So I can't say on the one hand it is raining, and on the other hand it is not raining. Or I can't say on the one hand he is a male, and on the other hand he is a female. I can't say these two things because these would somehow contradict one another. On the other hand, we go from the logical form, and this move right here is where we'll run into trouble with Kantianism, which we'll be refuting next time. But we move from the logical form, that is, that it is impossible to affirm and deny one of the same thing from the same perspective, to the ontological form. And this ontological form is that it is impossible for one and the same thing simultaneously to be and not be. If it is, it is not. Or really, being is not non-being, is the way in which we have to put it. So that's the foundation. That's the crux that we're going to be drawing forth all of these other principles. So from this, we can move on to that second rung that you see on here. And that rung is the principle of identity, which basically is kind of a different way of stating the principle of contradiction. From the fact that something that is not something that being is not non-being. From this, it follows that being is something. Well, what is that something? Well, being is being. There's an identity. That now this isn't a tautology, as some like to affirm it, where the being and the subject and the being and the predicate are somehow taken in the same way. Rather, this is something which is an affirmation of the absolute and immutable value of truth. It gives some sort of identity of being, and that opposition to non-being. So if we want to make this a little bit more explicit, what we're trying to get at, we can say something like every being has a determinate essence, or every being is a thing. That is, that thing is expressing the essence of that being. That which exists is its that which exists is its essence, its quiddity, its thingness. If we want to put it like that, there's an identity. It's making a statement of identity. It's making a statement of what it is. What is that being? Well, it is being. That's what's being stated here. So we're moving on from the principle of contradiction to the principle of identity. That's going to follow from. So from the principle of identity and the principle of contradiction, we come with another principle. And this is the last principle of the formal cause. So if you weren't sure, principle of contradiction, principle of identity, principle of substance, that's really considering the formal cause. Principle of change, it's considering the material cause, and principle of finality and efficient causality, that's final and efficient cause. And then raison d'etre is the kind of medium of movement from the formal to the efficient, final, and material. So basically what the principle of substance is going to say, and this is kind of a weird way of putting it, where does it say? Everything which is a substance, a phenomenon is only that by which something appears. So basically that's kind of a weird way to putting it in the chart, but the idea behind the principle of substance is that every single phenomenon, if a being has, so if a being has phenomenal accidents, so accidents which appear or act as phenomena in the sort of order of sense, that these are going to be identified somehow with a substance, with a thing. So there can't be phenomena that are mere phenomena. If you get me, if you get what I'm trying to say. So this may kind of be a bit obscure. It's maybe a bit obscure for how this connects with the principle of identity, but this formulation kind of helps. So this formulation that Garrigue gives is that every being is one and the same under its various and variable phenomena, if it has phenomena. So there's a sort of self-identity that being is being, that we're giving identity. So something is somehow identical as a thing with its phenomena, because it's its phenomena. If you get what I'm saying, hope that makes sense. I think this is the clearest way that I can possibly that I could possibly express these. That's the principle of substance, is that there's a unity, an underlying unity from phenomena, and this is the unity of substance. That something subsisting, because phenomena don't subsist. If they don't subsist, then they're not going to exist. If you get what I'm saying. So next, we can move on to probably what's going to be the most controversial, because this is where we move on from the order of formal cause. So principle of contradiction, principle of identity, principle of substance. Those are going to be pretty vanilla. Most people are going to just say, like, okay, yeah, I guess. But the principle of raison d'etre is really a key. And this idea is that every being must have a reason on account of which it exists rather than not. So every being must have a reason on account of which it exists rather than not. And this sounds at first glance, this sounds pretty obvious, but we'll see why it gets controversial. And the way we can prove it, I guess, before we move on, is that if something did not have a raison d'etre, so if something did not have a so-called reason for its being, rather than a reason for its not being, then it would not be distinguished from nothingness, because there would be no reason why it is rather than is not. So this is going to bring us kind of into two categories. Either something could have an intrinsic reason for why it is, and if it has an intrinsic reason for why it is, then it has its existence is its very essence, really. Which, if you know theology, then you know that's God. Or it can have an extrinsic reason for its existence. And in this case, if it has an extrinsic reason for its existence, an extrinsic raison d'etre, then it's going to be some sort of extrinsic cause. And there's two types of extrinsic cause, which bring us to our next two principles, which are going to be the principle of efficient causality, and it's going to be the principle of finality. Principle of finality is a little bit more controversial. So the first one's going to be the principle of efficient causality. And basically, the principle of efficient causality is that it is necessary that every contingent thing be efficiently caused by another, which basically means it is necessary that everything which does not have its own raison d'etre for its existence finds it as flowing forth from another and comes from another. And we can prove this through a reductio ad absurdum. Because when we look at what a contingent being is basically that which can exist or cannot exist. It doesn't have any sort of sway one for another, since it's not a necessary being. But if it did not exist from another, but was uncaused, so it didn't have an efficient cause, then it would simultaneously be from itself and not from itself. Because contingent is what can and cannot exist, and being uncaused means it's not from itself. Because if it was from itself, given that it is uncaused, and simultaneously would not be from itself, given that it is contingent. However, if it were neither from itself or not from itself, well, if it was neither from itself or from another, then it would have no raison d'etre. It just wouldn't exist. And it wouldn't be distinct from nothingness. So it wouldn't only lead to intelligibility, but also an absurd state of affairs. There would this sort of ridiculous idea of an uncaused contingent being. And next is going to be it's going to be the sort of big controversial one, which is the principle of finality. So when it comes to demonstrating this principle of finality, which basically is the fact that every agent acts on account of an end, so there's necessarily not only going to be an efficient cause but a final cause, we have to apply that principle of raison d'etre. We have to apply it to the acting agent, because we have to think, okay, what is the raison d'etre of doing one thing rather than another? If there's no intention there, then there is no sufficient raison d'etre for something doing one thing rather than another. It would just stand kind of in this medium, and therefore not be distinguished from not acting at all. So there needs to be some intention behind it. So if there's, and this is actually how St. Thomas is going to prove the existence of a God who orders. This is the fifth way right here. He's going to say, well, if there's things that don't have intelligence, and therefore cannot apprehend the raison d'etre of things, therefore there has to be a superior principle, which is itself guiding the things to their ends. So this is how he proves God on the basis of this principle of finality. But yeah, this principle of finality is basically the idea that because there needs to be a raison d'etre for the action of something, there needs to be some sort of intention that the intending agent is going to push towards, which is the final cause. Finally, we look at the principle of change, which basically is going to be the first principle on the side of material cause. And this principle of change is really easy. It's every change presupposes a changeable subject. And it's extremely, extremely easy to prove, because change is the transition transition of one thing from some to another. So if you had some sort of change without a changeable subject, then it would be the change of nothing. There'd be no changeable subject. So it would be the change of nothing. So there would be change and nothing would be changed. Yeah. So it's pretty easy to prove this one, the sort of principle, the principle of change on this one. So how does pantheistic evolutionism, how does it deny all of these first principles of reason that are going to be set forward? So the first principle that they contradict is the principle of efficient causality. And the reason that we say that is because in order for any form of pantheistic evolutionism to be true, either in the materialistic or in the idealistic forms, you need more to be produced from the less. And if you say that more is produced from the less, then you deny the principle of efficient causality. And the reason for this is you have nothing preceding which at all contains what is given. So you have a giving without a possessing. So you give what you don't have. So in that way, there's no reason, there's no raison d'etre that something has versus has not. There's nothing preceding at all. So when we look at something, for example, like materialistic evolutionism, you have matter. Matter is somehow giving intelligence. Matter is somehow giving science. Matter is something which is unintelligent, something which doesn't have any sort of intellect or will or any of sort of these perfections, is giving all of this great stuff which it doesn't have in any form. Or we can look at idealistic evolutionism, where it's sort of a universal, undeterminate being, which is somehow giving perfection, determination, delimitation, and all of this stuff, although it doesn't have any of these perfections. So, in contrast, when we look at what the Catholic Church teaches, when we look at what especially St. Thomas teaches, when we look around us and we see being, life, intelligence, morality, sanctity, goodness, love, when we see all of these perfections, we say, hey, there must be this perfection, not only potentially, not existing at all, like the evolutionists are gonna say, the pantheistic evolutionists are gonna say. Rather, we say that subsisting being, subsisting life, subsisting intelligence must exist. It must be up there, necessarily existing, in order to root what is given to us. So it's very easy to see here how much superior, when it comes to the principle of efficient causality, the Catholic teaching is over the teaching of the pantheistic evolutionists. So next what we see that pantheistic evolutionism is going to deny the principle of finality. Because what we've seen from the principle of finality is that action is going to presuppose some sort of orientation of the agent's power to give an act. Because there needs to be a raison d'etre for it acting in one way or not, and not another. And if there's some sort of unintelligent agent, then there's not going to be able to be an intention for an end. So there's going to be a passive orientation, which is going to presuppose an active orientation. But for the evolutionists, what they affirm is that there is no directing superior intelligence. Rather, either there's no intelligence at all, or this intelligence is somehow unconscious or somehow incidental. But there's no ordering, there's no conception of ends which are going to lead one to act in one way rather than another way. Now, what we're going to see in the third place, before we kind of ascend to the principle of raison d'etre and then the other principles, is that we have not only evolution without a cause, not only evolution without an end, we also have evolution without a subject, because due to the identity that there is between the changeable subject and the change itself, there is no subject. There is just change. There is just becoming, as they say. So therefore, in pantheistic evolutionism, the principle of subject completely fails. There's a sort of flowing without the river, so to speak. There's a changeableness or change without a thing which is changed in this case. So next, we can look at the denial of the principle of raison d'etre. And the reason for this is kind of simple, and it's kind of what we already talked about, is there's no principle of efficient causality, there's no principle of finality. And because of this, there's no reason at all for being or not being, no reason at all for acting or not acting. The principle of raison d'etre is just completely destroyed in either two of its applications. And also what we can see is it wouldn't even make sense for there to be any sort of raison d'etre, because there's no transcendental cause beyond the evolution itself at all. So it wouldn't make sense at all. And then we also see a denial of the principle of substance, because there really is no substance. There's not even a single substance. It's kind of a wrong way of putting it that I put in last episode. There's not even a single substance. Rather, there's only a becoming without subject. So there's all of these phenomena without a thing in which it is phenomenating, if you want to, without a thing in which it's showing. So this is also denying the principle of change that we talked about earlier. There's nothing which is appearing. It really is just kind of a ridiculous system. And then finally, at last, as sort of the cherry on top, this pantheistic evolutionism, it needs to deny the principle of contradiction as well, the principle of identity as well. And we already showed this indirectly through all of the other principles that follow from the principle of contradiction. But now we just see it directly, because they, in becoming, identify being and non-being with this sort of becoming. They say everything which is contrary is identified in becoming itself. You have all of these things which are identified. And then Garrigou, he actually, at the end of this section, it's a good read, but he shows basically how this almost becomes like a real life reductio ad absurdum to basically the solid proofs of St. Thomas. St. Thomas said, well, you either have to affirm the existence of God, or you can either deny the existence of the world, which is absurd, or you can deny basically all of the first principles of reason and fall into absurdity. And the Hegelians and all of the pantheistic evolutionists were basically like, okay, well, in order to deny the existence of a transcendent God, what we're going to do is we're going to affirm the absurd, affirm that the absurd is true, affirm that being is non-being, to fall on all of the first principles of reason. Okay, well, this one was a bit shorter, but that's all that I have for you. As always, thank you.